Welcome to Fire and by the Fire, where we're going through the book of Acts verse by verse, because it is so incredibly important that we see an example of what it really is to be the church. And when we look at what we see today, it doesn't resemble this. That's for sure. There's a lot that can be said about it, but it definitely doesn't resemble this. So as we go through this, we've hit that place where the disciples have found themselves in jail again, and then they were set free, and then they went straight into the synagogues and started preaching, and then were dragged, and they sought to kill them, is what we talked about. And these were well-respected religious figures, and you have to know, like we talked about in the last episode, that it is religious figures who will be pointing you out. They did to Jesus. They sought to kill these guys, and they ended up killing all of them except for John. So we're just going to pick it up right there where they're getting really they've been brought in front of the council of religious figures, and then we'll just pick it up here, Acts 5, verse 33. When they heard this, they were furious and took counsel to kill them. Then one of the council stood up, a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, held in respect by all the people, and commanded them to put the apostles outside for a little while. And he said to them, "Men of Israel, take heed to yourselves what you intend to do regarding these men. For some time ago, Thaddeus rose up, claiming to be somebody. A number of men, about 400, joined him. He was slain, and all who obeyed him were scattered and came to nothing. After this man, Judas of Galilee rose up in the days of census and drew away many people after him. He also perished, and all who obeyed him were dispersed. And now I say to you, keep away from these men and let them alone, for if this plan or this work is of men, it will come to nothing. But if it is of God, you cannot overthrow it, lest you even be found to fight against God." And they agreed with him. And when they had called for the apostles and beaten them, they commanded that they should not speak in the name of Jesus, and let them go. So they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. And daily in the temple and in every house they did not cease teaching, preaching Jesus as the Christ. So here, ultimately, what you have is this moment in time where they're thrown in jail. They're not worried about it. They get out. They're dragged in front of the council, and they're not worried about it. Like, they're just focused on the mission at hand. And they sought to kill them. So certainly in their mind, they thought, well, death might be possible in this moment. And it is a religious leader who stands up and ultimately points out this idea that, we've seen men come up and stand up and gather a bunch of people together and cause some ruckus before. And he gives two examples, and both those examples, as soon as that leader was slain, that was the end of it. As soon as he was slain, that was the end of it. They all just dispersed and scattered. So if it's of man, because their Jesus is dead, this is going to come to nothing. But if it's from God, then there's really nothing we could do about it. Now, this is a very wise saying, for one, and there's a lot to be said about this. But one of them is recognizing that, there's a lot of plots of man that really don't come to much, because even if you look at some of the religious plans of now, for example, big, not just mega churches, but mega conglomerations of churches, like, the Catholic Church or the Southern Baptist Convention, or, it's who is building that? Like, who's actually building it? Because if it's of God, then there's nothing you can do about it. If it's of the world, then ultimately it's going to come to nothing. And we were seeing that really differently around the world, because if we look at, like, for example, Africa, And one would argue, well, this is of God because it's growing like crazy, or in South America, just growing like crazy. You know, the largest growth of Christian churches right now are Hispanic and Asian churches. That's the largest growth. As far as just U.S. evangelical or European churches, they're all really, for the most part, kind of dwindling down, even though the population of the world is going up. So here, they're thrown in jail. Their lives are threatened. They are essentially wondering, you know, are we going to live? Or are we going to die? And ultimately, they beat them, tell them not to do this anymore, and then they release them. And they celebrate, like they count it joy that they took that beating. You know, so they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. Like they literally counted it joy to take that beating. And this is something that the modern church just simply doesn't understand. They don't understand what it means to sacrifice something like their life, their health, their, you know, any sort of pain that they might endure, like, or any sort of loss of anything, like money or really anything. They don't know what it's like to rejoice and to be counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. Like they just don't know what it's like. And this is something that, of course, the disciples knew exactly what that was like. So there you go, man. Just know that if for some reason your church isn't suffering in some way, and what I mean by like they're sacrificing their time and they're exhausted, or they're sacrificing their money and that's hard, or they're sacrificing their energy or their time. If there's no suffering or sacrifice there, I think you kind of have to question it, to be quite honest.